Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. It's a gloomy episode. Some of America's most valuable real estate is concentrated in our inner cities. Are American cities on the brink of collapse, or is their death exaggerated? Today on Get Rich Education.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Hayward, Wisconsin to Hayward, California, and across 188 nations worldwide. One day from our 9th anniversary of show production, you're listening to one of America's longest running and most listened to shows on real estate. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, here in Chicago today. When we talk about big U.S. cities, well, you've got to start with the biggest, the Big Apple. Though New York is not a border state, a lot of unemployed migrants that have come in through the southern border have been bussed northeast in order to go to New York City here in recent months. And New York City Mayor Eric Adams said 100,000 migrants will destroy his city. Existing New Yorkers are paying for their $500 a night hotels, $1,000 scooters, EBT cards, and clothing, and more. Well, New York City residents that have already lived there, they pay, say, half their money in taxes, and asylum seekers pay nothing in taxes. That's the complaint. Well, how long will it take those people, though, to become productive citizens? Because, of course, only the problem is seen at this point. I mean, I'm an American that's the descendant of immigrants, and if you're a U.S. listener, you probably are too. Pretty soon, we're going to bring in our famous author guest to have a conversation about the collapse of American cities. And then after our chat, I'm going to tell you what I've been seeing out in the field with my own two eyes, as this entire month I'm traveling and staying in or near the heart of the downtown of several cities: Denver, Omaha, Chicago, and I plan to visit Toledo and Boston next. I wouldn't consider Omaha and Toledo major cities, but they're really just on the way as I drive east between my main destinations of Denver, Chicago, and then Boston. Our guest and I today may very well discuss topics that I guess are deemed political, but really it's just where real estate intersects with some of the social issues of our time. And when it comes to political issues, I think you know my approach and my take, and I'm pretty emphatic about it, and that is this. Would you like to live in a nation that's less divided by political partisanship? Yes, I'm pretty confident that you would, and that's why I avoid labels like left, right, red, blue, conservative, liberal, and all of that, because those labels only serve to divide. Instead, focus on the content of one's character and the quality of their ideas, especially the long-term history of how ideas play out. History over hunches. It's a more gloomy episode than usual on the collapse of American cities. We're talking about the decline and potential for collapse in American cities with a rather revered guest today. He's been here with us a few times before to discuss other economic and real estate topics. He's a very popular author, often writing around the topic of crisis investing. He is known as the International Man. He's extremely well-traveled, and he has residences in multiple nations today. You may not know that he is the son of Eugene Casey, a renowned multimillionaire real estate developer. Hey, it's great to have back on Get Rich Education today the incomparable Doug Casey.
Nice to be with you again, Keith.
Doug, as we discuss the collapse of American cities, I think it helps if I name the top 10 largest U.S. cities, and there are a lot of ways to slice it, but I'm just going to go by the population of the city proper here to help emphasize the concentrated urban poor in order. Number one is New York City by far, more than twice as populous as number two, LA. Third is Chicago. Fourth is Houston. Fifth is Phoenix. And that's rounded out by Philly, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, and finally Austin, actually. That is all per the Census Bureau's latest estimate. And 7 out of those 10 actually lost population between 2020 and 2022, some of which is surely due to the health crisis, but we've got to wonder how many are coming back. So, Doug, why don't we start with what made big American cities attractive places to live in the past in the first place?
You want to be with other people that are doing things, building things, creating things. That's number one. That's why people have always lived in cities. It's convenient. It lends itself to specialization and division of labor. You don't have to make your own meals. You can go to a restaurant. So there are many, many advantages to living in a city. They've become large enough, and the society has become corrupt in a lot of ways, that cities in the U.S. anyway have become somewhat passé. They're on the slippery slope.
Cities can offer safety, comfort, wealth, community, like you mentioned. But yeah, a lot of American cities have visibly deteriorated across a lot of metrics in recent years. And for an increasing number of people, I think the value proposition of living in cities makes less sense than it used to. What's your take?
Well, now, in addition to the advantages of cities, there are some more obvious disadvantages. Higher taxes, more obvious regulations, a lot more crime, homeless people. We used to call them vagrants or bums, but now they're called homeless or even the unhoused, if you would,
Right.
are rampant throughout these cities that have changed the character and the ambiance of them. And I don't see that it's going to get better. It's a trend that's been in motion for a while, and trends that are in motion tend to stay in motion until they reach some type of a crisis. Then anything can happen.
Now, I presume by now everybody's heard the mnemonic that you actually wrote about in one of your recent articles again. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And unfortunately, American civilization has perhaps reached the stage where it's getting soft and weak and degraded. Why do you think that is?
I attribute a lot of it to the rise of socialist-style values in the U.S., where everybody thinks they can make a living by voting, essentially, or having somebody else do the work and the government can print up money to pay for it. That's a formula for disaster. So I tend to take a rather bearish outlook on the near-term future in the U.S. and actually the world at large. I mean, I've always been a believer in the ascent of man. Things have gotten better and better and better over the 5,000 years of recorded history.
Clean water to fast Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Exactly. And they've gotten better at an accelerating rate, so that Ray Kurzweil's singularity seems like it's actually just around the corner, 10 years, 15 years at most. But that's maybe not. Maybe we'll experience some type of a catastrophic collapse in between now and then. Perhaps it'll start with the war in the Ukraine spinning out of control. Entirely possible at this point. There's nothing that'll set you back worse than global thermonuclear war, unless it's a global biological war or perhaps a global crypto war, since the whole world runs on computers. And all these things are quite realistic prospects at this point. But even if we don't have those things, American populace has apparently voted. I don't know if Trump was right about the election being fixed or not, quite frankly, but the fact of the matter is we have actual Jacobins rule from Washington, D.C. By that, I mean they're the same people that took over after the French Revolution, wanted to change the entire nature of society. And that's what these people now running the U.S. want to do. And it's not a good thing, in my opinion.
Back in 2020, the Defund the Police movement, that was spawned from the George Floyd protests. I wonder if the word defund was hyperbolic in order to get attention, but I think some really wanted that, and perhaps instead reform reform the police is what they should have meant. Can you speak to that? And is that where some of this acceleration of the deterioration took place?
The character of U.S. society has changed a lot. People don't believe in basic values like hard work and personal responsibility,
right?
Individual liberty and things of this nature. Those are very passé. So yeah, it should have been reform the police movement, because the problems with the police in the U.S. is that they're loyal. Well, this is true of any group like that. It's not just American police, but they're loyal first to their colleagues, secondly, to their employers, and only thirdly, to the people they're supposed to protect and serve. So yes, you need police, and you need the right kind of people in police. But I wonder at this point if anybody would really want to join the police. It seems like an opportunity to be pilloried, and an opportunity that if you try to do your job, bad things could happen to you. And of course, there's a danger with police. You tend to get guys that have an extra Y chromosome that join it. They're more aggressive than, and of course they need to be. It's quite a problem. But it all adds up to the fact that people don't want to live in cities the way they used to. And there are less advantages to living in cities than there used to be. Take New York or any city in the U.S. When you have thousands and thousands of unemployed migrants coming to the city every day, and they all expect to be fed and housed and clothed. Question is, where and by who? It can actually tear the fabric of society. So since this is happening in all cities today, there's a migration of productive people out of cities, not even to the suburbs, but to exurbs beyond that, and preferably to small towns.
It's interesting. To your point, there's an avid Get Rich Education listener that lives in San Antonio, and he was on the police force. But around the time that the Defund the Police movement got traction in 2020, he actually quit the police force there in San Antonio and became a real estate agent in San Antonio. And it seemed like sometime after the Defund the Police movement got traction, there was also a Back the Blue movement as well, backing the police. You bring up a particular city, and now San Francisco, that's a top 20 U.S. size city. It was not in that top 10 list that I mentioned earlier, but according to census estimates reported this year, a lot of residents have left San Francisco. In fact, San Francisco County's population declined by more than 60,000 people. That's more than 7% from 2020 to 2022. And that's attributed to a lot of the problems that you brought up earlier: homelessness, crime, higher housing costs, and the rise of remote work. Take the city's Union Square neighborhood in San Francisco. That was once bustling with shoppers and diners and tourists, and that suffered from declining foot traffic and shuttered storefronts. So it's not a vibrant, bustling place, which is really what a lot of people think cities should be. I mean, stores including Nordstrom and Whole Foods have just closed up shop there in San Francisco's Union Square neighborhood. So with some of this in mind, and businesses leaving, it's not just aesthetics, and it's not just the decay in character and morality like you're talking about, but what do you think is going to happen to the already tight budgets of a lot of cities if their most productive residents and businesses continue to leave in increasing numbers? So what are the property tax implications there?
It's a real problem because as more and more migrants flood into the cities, these cities feel an obligation to support them. So their expenses are going up. All kinds of expenses to do with the change in the demographics of the cities. I don't see that it's turning around, quite frankly. So these cities are dead ducks. It's a doom loop. People working from home don't want to go into the cities. They don't want to commute. They don't want the expenses that incurs. So the office buildings are becoming increasingly see-through. And you can't use most of these office buildings for condominiums. Very hard to convert an office building to a residential condominium. So what's going to happen to them? Caracas, Venezuela, a city that I've become familiar with, used to be a delightful place. Lots of the office buildings in Caracas now are empty of businesses and have been taken over by squatters. The elevators don't work. 30-story office building is occupied up to, say, the 14th floor that you can walk up to. That type of thing happens there. Same thing is happening in Johannesburg in South Africa, where the downtown of Johannesburg used to be absolutely delightful. just a nice place. But now the same thing has happened, where even government buildings have been taken over by squatters. There was recently a fire in Johannesburg where like 100 people got killed in an occupied government building where they were just squatting there and dividing the offices up into little tiny cubicles to sleep in and so forth. All right. You say, well, that's Caracas. That's Johannesburg. It could happen in the U.S. I'm not predicting that it will happen, but we're on a path for that to happen at this point in places like New York and San Francisco.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point because I talked about the potential decline in city revenues with a diminished tax base. And it's not just that declining income, it's potentially increased expenses at the same time if they need to house more migrants. And to your point about the office buildings, yeah, it was a few months back. There was this very well-publicized article in the New York Times claiming that there were over 26 Empire State Buildings worth of empty office space in New York City. So can you tell us more about the implications of that trend on commercial real estate and financial markets from your view, including maybe any speculative opportunities you see? Because it's very difficult to convert these office buildings into residences.
There will be a speculative opportunity there at some point, since trends in motion tend to stay in motion.
Yeah.
And this trend is still accelerating. I think it's way too early to speculate in unused and perhaps in the future unusable office space. Look, things like Zoom that we're on right now are relatively new innovations. And since you can't plan and build an office building in 6 months, it takes more like 6 years by the time you get approvals and so forth. The slow slope of building and so forth, the Zoom revolution has barely caught up with office space. So I don't see anything good for office space in the near future from just about any point of view. Stay away from it as a speculative opportunity.
These decrepit office buildings can really create this dead zone downtown. And a lot of people don't realize that Zoom is called Zoom because Zoom is effectively a transportation device where two people can Zoom virtually and be face-to-face right next to each other. You're listening to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Doug Casey about the decline of American cities. More when we come back, including historically, cities do have life cycles and empires rise and fall. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4 plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. You know, I'll just tell you, for the most passive part of my real estate investing, personally, I put my own dollars with Freedom Family Investments because their funds pay me a stream of regular cash flow and returns are better than a bank savings account, up to 12%. Their minimums are as low as $25K. You don't even need to be accredited for some of them. It's all backed by real estate, and I kind of love how the tax benefit of doing this can offset capital gains and your W-2 job's income. And they've always given me exactly their stated return, paid on time. So it's steady income, no surprises while I'm sleeping or just doing the things I love. For a little insider tip, I've invested in their Power Fund. To get going on that, text family to 66866. Oh, and this isn't a solicitation. If you want to invest where I do, just go ahead and text family to 66866.
This is Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with the international man, Doug Casey, about this potential collapse of American cities. By the way, you can learn more about Doug at internationalman.com, as well as his YouTube channel and podcast that is called Doug Casey's take. Doug, cities have life cycles. Historically, city-state empires rise and fall. So from that long-term historic perspective, can you speak to us about how we can think about that with today's American cities?
Yeah, I don't want to be overly apocalyptic about this, but people forget that Rome went from a city of 1 million people in the ancient world, but by the time the Dark Ages arrived, starting in about the year 600, there were cows and sheep and hogs that were wandering through the forum, and they were disassembling the ancient buildings for building materials for huts and this type of thing. This is nothing new in history. Anything can happen to a city or a civilization. The trend, and I tend to be a trend follower from this point of view, long-term trends, actually, not just 2 or 3 or 5 years, but 50 or 100 years, or if you wish, 500 years. I think the trend that we're experiencing right now is taking a downturn. The culture in the country is changing right before our very eyes. It's gone from a culture of hard work, personal responsibility, values that used to be considered traditional, to something very different.
Now, we can think of the rise and fall of famous city-states, including Rome, like you mentioned, and Babylon. I know you have some notes about Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Of course, the Haitian economy is very different than the United States economy, but it's pretty close geographically to the United States. So as the international man, can you tell us more about what you've seen about the rise and fall in Port-au-Prince?
I'm pretty familiar with Haiti. I've been down there numerous times, starting in about the year 1970, long time ago. And in those days, Haiti itself was always a poor country, but it was a very safe country. It was very safe, as a matter of fact. It was delightful. Restaurants, cheap, entertainment was great. Of course, at that time, it was a dictatorship under Papa Doc Duvalier, and it was a bit of a police state. It was great for tourists because if anything happened to a tourist, they'd find out who did it, and the person would be very sorry about it. Well, he wouldn't last long enough to be sorry. But now, I'm not a believer in these reports from the State Department, which say, don't go there, it's dangerous. They're mostly hysterical, and they overrate the danger. But in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, it actually is a really, really dangerous place where the hotels don't work. They're mostly closed down. The restaurants are all closed. Gangs, which are vicious, rule the city. A tourist can't go there or shouldn't go there without a bodyguard or two, an armed bodyguard. Things can change. What's going to make Haiti get better? I can think of the things that could be done. Perhaps what Bukele has done in El Salvador would be a step in the right direction for Haiti. El Salvador would have been, after Haiti, I would say, the worst country in the Western Hemisphere. But with the election of Nayib Bukele, he actually locked up 65,000 criminals in jails. Amazing that he was able to do that there. But the place is experiencing a renaissance now. That's radical executive action. But when a place is really at the edge of total chaos, perhaps that type of thing is necessary.
Yeah, when it comes to Haiti, I have only been on the other side of Hispaniola there in the Dominican Republic. But one time Haiti had poverty but safety, and now they have poverty but unrest. Should one necessarily correlate prosperity with safety or prosperity with a place that's peaceful? Because I think internationally, most people think of the United States as prosperous. I don't know how places square that up with the civil unrest in the United States. Should there be much of a correlation between prosperity and peace?
Yeah, there should be, because a truly free market society where you're not overly burdened by taxes and regulations, the average guy can plan ahead, he can save for his future, he can grow in wealth. And in order to do that, everybody understands, we need a certain measure of stability in society. So a prosperous society tends to be a safe society. It used to be that way in Haiti. In fact, in all of these countries in the world where the government destroys the currency, you can't plan for the future. You can't build for the future because let's say that you produce more than you consume and you set aside the difference. How are you going to do that? In almost any country in the world, you have to save the national currency, whether it's the Haitian gourd or the Argentine peso. But if you save the currency and it loses value at 50 or 100% per year, you have nothing. You're living hand to mouth. And typically in these places, the banks can't be trusted. In addition to the currency can't be trusted. Naturally, you think, how else can I earn a living to feed my family? Maybe I have to steal that loaf of bread. So prosperity goes hand in hand with safety. Now, in the United States, it's a little bit different today because a lot of our prosperity has been financed by debt. And what is debt all about? Well, it means when you borrow money for consumption. I mean, it's one thing to borrow money. Let's say you're a farmer and you go to the bank and borrow money so you can buy seeds and fertilizer to put in your crop. It's a self-liquidating debt. The crop comes in, you pay off the debt, you have a profit, all's well that ends well. But most of the debt that we have today in America is consumption debt. It's not for new production. And where does that capital come from? It comes from either past money, past capital that was earned by past generations. So you're either liquidating the capital, which has been built up over many, many years in the past, and or you're mortgaging your future, turning yourself into a serf. So a lot of the prosperity, I think, that we've had here in the U.S., some of it's very real, with increases in technology, very good, and people setting aside, producing more than they consume and setting aside the difference. Inflation hasn't been that bad to destroy it. I think in a lot of ways we're eating the seed corn at this point here in the U.S. and have been for some years.
Yes, currency decay can correlate with societal decay. For example, Bukele doing some radical things there in El Salvador. For example, legalizing Bitcoin, something which has a fixed supply, unlike most fiat currencies in the world. But Doug, bringing it back to the United States, do you have any idea what other nations think about civil unrest in United States cities? Because other nations, they deem the U.S. as orderly, prosperous, with the rule of law, military and politically powerful. I mean, you just take a lot of places in the world, like back to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, or a place in the world like Kinshasa in the DRC, the third largest African urban agglomeration, or a place like Managua, Nicaragua, where those very people might be trying to migrate across the border into the United States. So what do people in other nations think about this decay in U.S. cities?
It's a paradox in a way. On the one hand, people want to come to the U.S. because they might have an image of the way things were in the past.
Yeah.
Convertible cars and
right.
California girls and blue jeans and prosperity, wonderful things. And of course, that draws people. The image of America has changed a lot in recent years to one of invading soldiers, overthrowing governments. Americans are not loved and respected so much. They're increasingly hated and feared around the world. It's really a terrible thing, what's happened to the image of the United States. And it's taken time. It's happened over the last 50 years, where the image of the United States in the eyes of foreigners has been transformed. And now, most of the people that come to the U.S. aren't coming for the reasons they used to come in the past. A lot of the current migrants are coming because there's free stuff. They know that if they cross the border,
right,
which they're doing by the thousands, they'll be given free food, free shelter, a place to live, free transportation. A member of a group that I have on internationalman.com wrote a letter in. He lives in a nice little town in Massachusetts, kind of like Mayberry, Andy Griffith's, mythical place.
Yeah.
There are two motels down the road from where he is, the same road that Paul Revere was supposed to have ridden down 200 years ago. And he says these hotels are jammed to overflowing with Haitian migrants. He doesn't know how they got there, who's putting them up, who's feeding them, or anything about them. But they're young, unmarried males. And I'm sure they think it's much better than being in Haiti right now. But at some point, they're going to get bored. They can't get jobs because they don't have papers. They don't speak the language. They're going to get in trouble. This is in a suburban town in Massachusetts, and it's happening all over the U.S.
Yes, you would think it would take quite a long time for them to be productive members of American society there in that particular Massachusetts hotel situation that you described. Well, Doc, as we're winding down here, we sure put a lot of problems out there that have to do with the potential collapse of American cities. like to wrap up with what can one actually do about this? Now, you mentioned that a person can simply opt out of living in a city and sort of vote with their feet, but maybe how else can an American respond to this deterioration of U.S. cities? Is there anything else that's actionable from your view?
There are people that will say, make sure you vote for the right guy in the coming election. I'm not sure there is any right guy, because the kind of people that get into politics and want to be elected are people that want to control other people. That's why they get into politics. So whether they're a member of the red party or the blue party, it's a question of whether you're choosing arsenic or cyanide for your poison, essentially. They tend to share the same values, although they use different rhetoric. So charity begins at home. Anybody listening that's concerned about the direction of things right now should let charity begin at home. That means you should work extra hard at this time, because I think things are going to get much worse and much more quickly over the next couple of years as we come up to an election in 2024. So work hard, produce more than you consume, save the difference. How do you save the difference? Well, it's tough saving the difference in dollars these days, which are being inflated away from you. It's tough. I know that you're a real estate investor, and real estate has been very, very good to me, too.
Likewise.
But that's changing, too, because buy a property and rent it. We know the drill for that. But frankly, I think interest rates have just started to go up for lots of reasons. That's a whole different discussion, is where interest rates probably going and why. I think you should direct most of your savings to precious metals. I hate to say that, even though gold is, $1,900, $2,000. It's not at bargain levels anymore, but at least it's a stable asset. It's quite a problem because we're on a ship that's taking on water, and we're all on the ship. The people that are in first class are going to have the same problems, not as bad, the same problems as the people that are down below in steerage. I think you should diversify internationally, quite frankly, so that you have an alternative if things get really bad here. I know, you say things get really bad in America. How's that possible? Anything's possible. The people that lived in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1917 did not think what was going to happen in the next few years would happen. People that lived in Germany in 1933 couldn't believe what was in store for them. People that were in China in 1949 had no clue it was going to get that bad. Vietnam, 1976, turned into boat people. A lot of countries around the world where this can happen to. Well, Venezuela more recently. I would internationalize so that, because your biggest risk today and the cause of all these problems, it comes down to the state, your government, what it's doing and who it's controlled by. You need political diversification as well as financial diversification. But it's a real problem. You got to educate yourself so that you don't have to listen to the advice of someone like myself or yourself, any of us, so that everybody should be in a position to make these decisions for themselves.
There's a hollowing out of United States cities. There's also a hollowing out of the middle class. So there are some actionable strategies, including protecting yourself with real assets. Well, Doug, if our audience wants to learn more about you and all the great media that you offer, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can go to internationalman.com, and we have excellent articles there on lots of subjects every day. And I give a podcast once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week on YouTube called Doug Casey's Take. So if you want to hear more from me, either in written or verbal form, that's where to go.
Doug, it's been enlightening and eye-opening as always. Thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Keith. Thank you.
Yeah, I often appreciate getting Doug's perspective. Now, in San Francisco, say that you want to sell your $2 million condo because you are in a problem neighborhood and you want to get out of that down-draining situation. Well, there, you have to pay 1% transfer tax to get out. A $20,000 tax just to escape a situation that you don't want. And the property value of that inner city place has probably been adversely affected too. Well, instead, here at GRE, from day one, we more or less invest in areas that actually don't tend to make the news so much. And we are away from higher price coasts We have more of the high tax, high crime, high vagrancy situations, and even high news situations. So instead, we're talking about places like Ocala, Florida, and Dayton, Ohio, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and Sarasota, Florida. Maybe Florida, Georgia being two of those few states that actually are coastal places that make some sense. Now, I think that Americans and probably even citizens of most any nation, what they tend to do is broad brush stroke a nation or a state or a city based on what they hear on the news, and yet they have not visited that place in person, but yet they form these strong opinions. For example, I'm visiting Chicago today. One person that I know heard that I was coming here, and their first response was like, "What? Chicago? Oh, that's like the crime or murder capital of America." And my response in a soft way is sort of like, well, where? Where in Chicago do you mean? I'm not staying on the South Side or on any of the other notoriously crime-ridden areas. I mean, people tend to do this in our real estate investing world as well, broad brushstroke places. For example, one city that you may have bought property in through GRE Marketplace is Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I've heard, actually, it's not too many people over the years, but it's been a number of them. I hear people say something like, "I don't think I'm going to invest in Memphis because I've heard that they have high crime." Well, where? What part of this city? Most every U.S. city and any world city has one or more blighted or crime-ridden areas, and then one or more pristine and pricey and really attractive areas. Well, we're generally not buying in those blighted areas. And it's funny, most people that make these bold sort of proclamations that they heard that some city is so bad, you know what? All these people have one thing in common. They've never even been there. Or if they have, it's been decades and they don't really know what's happening there. And of course, major media outlets don't help. They want eyeballs and they want clicks, so they're only going to show you the worst parts of the city in order to get your attention. Attention is really like a currency for the major media. It's like a currency that they're collecting, attention. And the funny thing is that you'll find that people, they tend to know this about their own city, okay? And you in your own city, like you tend to know and be mindful of the fact that your own city has some good areas and some bad areas, but yet one that people haven't visited before. They often make all kinds of gross generalizations, and they're usually of the negative kind. Now, rather than a domestic perspective like I've been talking about here, let's take a foreign perspective. Let's say that you live in the United States here in this example. Okay, you're a U.S. citizen, and what do Pakistanis think of you based on what they hear? And what do Azerbaijanis and Armenians and French people, what do some of them think of you thousands of miles away based on what they see on the news? Well, of course, if you're an American, there's no way that you would send your kid to a public school. That would be outrageous because everyone over there, they all hear about how America is the school shooting capital of the world. See how ridiculous the generalization and the broad brushstroking feels when someone else does it to you? It feels pretty ridiculous. If you're in the United States, you're probably not taking any inordinate risk by having your children attend the local school. And sure enough, as I'm visiting 3 major U.S. cities this month, Denver, Chicago, and Boston, well, I'm not staying in the blighted or crime-ridden areas. I'm finding places that are beautiful, clean, efficient, and fun. And of course, this is just one part of these cities too. Major cities are complex, large places, and you can find most anything that you want to, depending on what interests you. So some takeaways for today are some cities really are deteriorating, but let's not generalize, especially if we haven't been to a specific place. And as investors, troubled large coastal cities are just another reason that we largely invest inland. To call many American cities collapsing is often premature. Until next week, when I'll be back to help you build your wealth, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.